Duane Ollinger has never been the kind of man who breaks news. He drills, he excavates, he absorbs setbacks that would end most operations and comes back the following season with heavier equipment and a more specific target. He does not make announcements. He makes discoveries, which is why what he is breaking right now from Blind Frog Ranch is the most significant communication he has ever made, because Duane Ollinger only speaks when he has something real to say. Subscribe and stay until the very end. Duane Ollinger's public profile across the Blind Frog Ranch investigation is defined by a quality that distinguishes him from every other personality in the paranormal documentary landscape: the quality of operational credibility. He is not a presenter. He is not an investigator in the academic or journalistic sense. He is an operator, a man whose relationship to the property he owns and the underground mystery it contains is governed entirely by the practical question of what is down there and what it takes to reach it. That operational identity is what makes what he is breaking right now more significant than any comparable announcement from any comparable figure in the paranormal television space. When Duane Ollinger says something is happening at Blind Frog Ranch, it is because something is happening at Blind Frog Ranch. The prior seasons of the show have established that baseline with enough consistency that the audience who has followed the investigation knows the difference between a production moment designed to generate dramatic tension and a genuine development that Duane's practical assessment has identified as warranting communication. The genuine developments have a specific character in the Blind Frog Ranch broadcast record. They arrive without the telegraphing that manufactured drama produces. They are delivered with the plain-spoken directness of a man whose professional background does not include the entertainment industry's vocabulary for building anticipation. And they consistently understate, rather than overstate, the significance of what they are describing. Duane's instinct is always to let the physical evidence speak, rather than to position himself as the spokesman for its implications. The investigation history of Blind Frog Ranch reflects that instinct across every season. The discoveries have been described in terms of what was found and what the instruments measured, rather than in terms of what the findings mean for the broader questions the investigation has been addressing. What he is breaking right now is different in a specific and consequential way. He is not describing a discovery. He is describing a situation whose current character, the specific combination of what the investigation has reached, what the instruments are detecting, and what the implications of those detections are for the direction the investigation must now take, has produced in Duane Ollinger the specific communication instinct that his prior investigation history has not previously produced. The instinct to speak before the evidence is fully compiled. The instinct to communicate now rather than wait for the complete picture. That instinct, in a man whose operational discipline has always kept him silent until the evidence was ready to speak for itself, is the most significant thing about what he is breaking. Something at Blind Frog Ranch has happened that cannot wait for the next season. The Blind Frog Ranch investigation has a public dimension. The broadcast seasons, the episode-by-episode documentation of the excavation operation's progress, the Discovery Channel framework within which the investigation has been producing its findings for the audience that has followed it across its run. And it has a private dimension, the continuous operational activity that occurs between filming seasons, outside broadcast windows, in the periods when the cameras are not running and the production infrastructure is not present on the property. That private dimension is where most of the investigation's most significant developments have originated. The discoveries that defined each broadcast season were not produced by the cameras. They were produced by the operation that the cameras documented after the fact. The drilling that reached the chamber, the excavation that recovered the anomalous materials, the sonar and radar work that progressively mapped the underground formation beneath the property. All of it happened in the operational space between and alongside the production's filming schedule rather than within it. What has been happening in the private dimension of the Blind Frog Ranch investigation in the period preceding Duane's announcement is the foundation on which what he is breaking rests. The operation has not been idle between seasons. The monitoring infrastructure installed on the property has been running continuously. The instrument data it has been collecting has been reviewed and analyzed by the investigation's technical team on the operational timeline of the research program rather than the production timeline of the broadcast series. And what that monitoring infrastructure has been detecting in the period immediately preceding the announcement is what produced the communication instinct that Duane's prior investigation history has not previously exhibited. The electromagnetic readings from the active zones of the property have been showing a pattern of change whose character the technical team has assessed as directional rather than cyclical, not fluctuating within an established range but moving consistently in one direction across the monitoring period. The underground vibration signatures from the drilling zone have been showing structural changes whose implications the team has been examining with the specific quality of professional attention that indicates findings being processed carefully rather than casually. And the thermal monitoring at the property boundary has been producing readings that the prior baseline data identifies as outside the normal variance range, with a frequency and a geographic consistency that indicates a change in the property's activity level rather than random instrument variation. The ranch has been doing something in the period nobody was watching. What it has been doing is what Duane is now breaking. Duane Ollinger does not make announcements in response to gradual developments. The prior seasons of the Blind Frog Ranch investigation have established that his threshold for public communication about the investigation's findings is high. He has absorbed seasons of extraordinary evidence without making statements outside the broadcast framework that the Discovery Channel production provided as the investigation's official communication channel. What triggered the announcement is therefore itself significant, not just as the context for what he is saying, but as evidence about the category of development that could overcome Duane's operational discipline about speaking before the evidence is fully ready to speak for itself. The development that triggered the announcement is connected to the underground formation that the investigation has been approaching across its seasons, specifically to a change in the underground formation's detectable characteristics that the monitoring infrastructure identified in the period preceding the announcement, and that the investigation's technical team assessed as representing a qualitative shift rather than a quantitative escalation in what the formation has been producing. The prior seasons documented a progressive escalation in the underground activity associated with the formation, instrument readings that increased in intensity as the drilling operation approached the formation's most significant features, vibration signatures that strengthened as the excavation closed the distance to the primary void network, electromagnetic readings that elevated in the active zones above the formation's mapped position. All of that prior escalation was consistent with the pattern the investigation had established of the formation responding to the drilling operations approach, responses that increased in intensity as the approach got closer. What changed in the monitoring data in the period preceding the announcement is not an escalation of the prior pattern, it is a departure from it. The formation's instrument signature has changed in character rather than in intensity, shifted from the response pattern the investigation had established as its baseline to a pattern whose characteristics the technical team found inconsistent with the established behavioral profile of the formation across the investigation's prior seasons. Something about what the underground formation is doing has changed. Not more of the same, different. Different in a way that the investigation's accumulated seasons of monitoring data did not predict and does not account for. That unpredicted change in the formation's behavior is the specific development that produced Duane Ollinger's announcement, and the specific nature of the change is what the news he is breaking consists of. The instrument data that the Blind Frog Ranch monitoring infrastructure is currently producing is the body of evidence on which Duane's announcement is based. And understanding what the instruments are detecting requires understanding both what they have been measuring across the investigation's prior seasons and what is different about what they are measuring right now. The electromagnetic monitoring network positioned across the property's active zones has been the investigation's primary continuous measurement system since its installation. Across the prior seasons, its data has produced a consistent picture of the property's electromagnetic environment. Elevated field strength in specific zones whose correspondence to the underground formation's mapped position has established a direct relationship between the surface electromagnetic anomalies and the subsurface structures that generate them. What the electromagnetic network is currently detecting is a departure from that consistent picture. The field strength elevation in the active zones has not simply increased, it has reorganized. The geographic distribution of the elevated readings across the monitoring network has shifted in a pattern whose analysis the investigation's technical team has characterized as indicating a change in the source geometry of whatever is generating the surface electromagnetic anomalies. The source is not where it was. Either the underground structure generating the electromagnetic signature has shifted position. A physical movement of geological material whose scale the prior vibration data did not predict, or the mechanism by which the underground structure interacts with the surface electromagnetic environment has changed in a way that produces the same observational signature as a position shift. Either interpretation has significant implications for the investigation's understanding of what the underground formation is and what it is capable of doing. The ground vibration sensors have been producing data that the technical team has been examining with particular attention since the electromagnetic reorganization was first detected. The vibration signatures currently being logged at the sensor positions closest to the primary void network are showing a temporal structure, a repeating pattern of onset and cessation that the prior monitoring data did not contain. Random geological activity produces vibration signatures that vary without pattern. What the sensors are currently logging does not vary without pattern. It repeats, with a regularity that the technical team's analysis has characterized as inconsistent with any geological process in the reference literature for the Uinta Basin's subsurface environment. The underground formation at Blind Frog Ranch is currently producing something that the investigation's monitoring infrastructure was not designed to detect, and that the investigation's prior evidence record did not prepare anyone to encounter. That something is what Duane Ollinger is breaking the news about. Duane Ollinger's announcement breaks news on 3 specific subjects whose combination is what makes it significant in a way that its individual components do not fully account for separately. The first subject is the underground formation's current state. Duane describes what the monitoring data has been showing in terms that reflect his operational discipline: factual, specific, without the dramatization that the paranormal television format typically applies to extraordinary findings before presenting them to an audience. The formation is active in a way that the investigation has not previously documented. The reorganization of the electromagnetic signature, the repeating temporal structure in the vibration data, and a third instrument category whose readings the investigation had treated as peripheral rather than primary across the prior seasons, but whose current values the technical team has identified as directly relevant to understanding what the formation is doing. All of these are described by Duane with the plain-spoken directness that his prior communications about the investigation's findings have consistently produced. The second subject is the drilling operation's current status and what the formation's changed behavior means for the investigation's ability to continue approaching it through the methodology the prior seasons established. The lateral approach that reached the chamber is not the approach the investigation is currently pursuing. The formation's changed electromagnetic geometry has identified a different entry point as the most viable current pathway to the underground void network's most significant features, and the operation has been repositioning its equipment to pursue that entry point in response to what the monitoring data has established about the formation's current configuration. The third subject is the timeline. Duane does not typically discuss timelines. His prior communications about the investigation have been consistently oriented toward what has been found rather than what is expected to be found and when. The fact that the announcement includes a timeline, a specific characterization of the period within which the investigation expects the current developments to produce findings that exceed everything the prior seasons have documented, is the element of the news that the investigation's most serious followers will identify as the most significant departure from Duane's established communication pattern. He is not describing what has been found. He is describing what is about to be found. And the confidence that characterizes that description is the confidence of a man whose monitoring data has given him specific reason to believe the timeline he is communicating is real. What Duane Ollinger is breaking about Blind Frog Ranch does not exist in isolation from the broader Uinta Basin context that gives the investigation its full significance. And that context has developed in ways during the period preceding the announcement that amplify what the Blind Frog Ranch monitoring data is showing in a manner that neither body of evidence alone would produce. The Skinwalker Ranch investigation, 15 miles to the east, has been documenting its own set of developments in the same period. Underground signal data whose escalation pattern the investigation's technical team has been tracking with the specific quality of professional attention that indicates findings being processed carefully. Perimeter surveillance data whose most recent sessions have produced anomalous readings in the approach vectors connecting the two properties, and drilling operation data whose resistance pattern has been changing in ways that correspond in their timing to the changes the Blind Frog Ranch monitoring infrastructure has been detecting. 2 independent investigation programs operating at 2 separate properties within the same basin, deploying different instrument systems with different methodologies, are detecting changes in the underground environment that correspond in their timing and whose geographic distribution across the basin is consistent with a basin-wide development rather than property-specific events. The correspondence is not a conclusion that either investigation has officially drawn, but the people who are reviewing the data from both programs with knowledge of what each is producing have been noting the correspondence with the specific quality of attention that indicates something is being recognized rather than something being constructed. The Ute traditions about the Uinta Basin describe it as a living landscape, a geographic region whose behavior changes in response to circumstances in ways that the traditions treat as intentional rather than incidental. The current monitoring data from both properties is consistent with a change in the basin's underground behavior, whose timing, geographic distribution, and instrument signatures are more consistent with the tradition's description of the landscape responding to something than with the conventional geological and atmospheric processes that the scientific literature applies to comparable measurement anomalies. Duane Ollinger is not breaking news about a property-level development at Blind Frog Ranch. He is breaking news about a basin-level development whose Blind Frog Ranch manifestation is the most directly documented expression of something that is occurring across a geographic area that encompasses every anomalous property in the Uinta Basin simultaneously. That is the context within which what he is breaking should be understood. And it is the context that makes his announcement the most significant communication the Blind Frog Ranch investigation has ever produced. The scientific consultants engaged by the Blind Frog Ranch investigation to assess the current monitoring data have produced assessments whose specific content Duane has referenced in his announcement in the characteristically restrained terms that his operational discipline applies to scientific findings whose implications exceed what he is willing to overstate. Understanding what those assessments actually established, what the scientists said about the current data when they applied their professional methodologies to it without the restraint that Duane's public communication imposes on his account of their findings, requires going beyond what the announcement directly states to what the people familiar with the assessment process have described about its conduct and conclusions. The geological assessment of the electromagnetic reorganization produced a finding that the consulting geologist communicated to the investigation with a directness that their professional scientific caution does not typically produce in initial assessments of complex monitoring data. The reorganization pattern is not consistent with any geological process in the reference literature for the Uinta Basin's subsurface environment. It is not consistent with tectonic activity. The basin's seismic profile does not account for the type or scale of subsurface movement that would produce the observed electromagnetic reorganization. It is not consistent with hydrological changes in the underground water system that the investigation has been documenting. The water table behavior in the relevant zone does not correspond to the geographic pattern of the electromagnetic shift, and it is not consistent with the drilling operation's own activity. The operation has not been working in the zone where the reorganization has been detected, and its own electromagnetic contribution to the monitoring data has been characterized and subtracted from the readings before the reorganization pattern was identified. The physical analysis of the repeating temporal structure in the vibration data produced a finding whose communication to the investigation the technical team has described as the moment the assessment changed character. The temporal structure's period, the interval between the onset and cessation events that the pattern repeats with, is consistent across the full monitoring dataset, not approximately consistent, precisely consistent in a way that natural geological processes do not produce. Natural vibration sources produce irregular patterns. The Blind Frog Ranch vibration data is producing a pattern that repeats with the precision of a mechanism. Something in the underground formation at Blind Frog Ranch is operating on a cycle. The scientific team's assessment of that finding is what Duane's announcement is built around, and what it means, what a mechanically precise repeating cycle in the vibration signature of an underground formation that the prior investigation has established as constructed rather than natural means, is the question that the news he is breaking opens without yet fully answering. The Blind Frog Ranch investigation enters its next operational phase in the context of the current monitoring data with a specific and unprecedented set of advantages that the prior season's accumulated evidence has produced. The underground formation has been mapped to a resolution that the early season's sonar work could not achieve. The lateral approach methodology that successfully reached the chamber has been refined in response to the prior approach attempts' documented resistance patterns. The monitoring infrastructure has been producing continuous data, whose analysis has now identified the formation's current activity pattern with enough specificity to guide the drilling operations' targeting decisions in a way that the prior season's more general geological intelligence did not permit. And the scientific team engaged to assess the current data has produced findings that give the investigation its most specific understanding yet of what the formation is doing and where its current activity is most concentrated. What comes next is the most targeted approach the Blind Frog Ranch drilling operation has ever been able to mount. An approach whose entry point selection, whose penetration methodology, and whose response protocols have all been designed in response to specific current monitoring data rather than in response to the general underground map the prior seasons produced. The formation's current activity pattern, the electromagnetic reorganization, the repeating temporal structure in the vibration data, the third instrument category whose current readings the technical team has identified as indicating the formation's most active zone, has given the investigation a targeting picture whose specificity is categorically different from anything the prior season's evidence allowed. Duane's communication about the timeline is grounded in that targeting picture. The approach is ready, the target is identified, the monitoring data is current and specific. What the operation expects to reach when the approach is executed is not the speculative destination that motivated the prior season's drilling. It is the specific feature of the underground formation that the current monitoring data has identified as the source of the repeating temporal cycle whose mechanical precision the scientific team's assessment established as the formation's most anomalous current characteristic. Whether reaching that feature produces what the investigation expects it to produce is the question that the next operational phase will answer. What Duane's announcement communicates about that question, with the confidence that characterizes his descriptions of what the monitoring data has established, is that the investigation is closer to the answer than it has ever been, and that the current data has given it a map to reach it that the prior seasons were never able to produce.